today changes my whole entire life.
Welcome to Gritability, a podcast about the power of perseverance, overcoming seemingly insurmountable odds to attain the life of your dreams. I'm your podcast host, Adam Clausen, and I am happy to be joining all of you today. We have an amazing guest with us, good friend of mine, goes back many, many years. Separated for many of those years. It's great to be able to finally join him, even if it is via Zoom. Chad Marks.
What's up, Adam? I appreciate you bringing me on. And yeah, we've been friends for a long time. So I guess we're going to get into some good things today.
Absolutely. Man, this episode was right on time because the United States Sentencing Commission just recently announced a couple days ago that they're going to go ahead and expand the use of what's called compassionate release. That's how you and I both got here. So we each have amazing stories. It's funny. Many of the times when I have told my story, I reference you, and not always by name, but I say, man, this friend of mine who had a situation, was about to be released. And I don't want to go into your story, but it actually raised some concerns for me. I didn't know if I was going to walk out the door. So to have both of us here today is pretty amazing. I'd like to, talk a little bit about your background. It's one of those things that you and I really haven't had too much of a chance to get into that. So I figured we'd start from the beginning, because what this podcast is all about is, people see the end result, and we're both here, the result of many, many years of like straight up just hard work, right? And belief. You had to believe in yourself, and you had to get a lot of other people to believe in you too, right? Like this didn't come easy.
100%. I used to tell people in prison, some guys would laugh. I'd tell people, man, I'm getting out of prison. And they would laugh. And I say, if I don't believe it, no one else will, so.
So true, man. So true. So why don't we do this? Because I'm always curious, and I'm sure the rest of our listeners are curious. Tell us a little bit about your background. Let's take it back kind of to your youth. I know for me, what prepared me for all of the challenges that came, throughout that 20 plus years that I was incarcerated, I can often point to like athletics. Like I got in the habit of winning. I was athletic. It gave me different opportunities. Like I had a competitive advantage. So I had that like going into this, getting a life sentence, and it kind of helped me to deal with it. So I'm curious to know what in your background, maybe in your youth, kind of helped prepare you for all the challenges that you ultimately faced.
Okay, I'll do that. But first, I'll just tell people my name's Chad Marks. At the age of 24, I was sentenced to a 40-year federal mandatory minimum in federal prison. And I went to prison and never gave up, right? I became one of the best jailhouse lawyers in the federal prison system. But, same thing as you. As a kid, I was always a fighter, grew up in a bad neighborhood, always involved in sports. I was the captain of my wrestling team in middle school and high school. Was an amateur fighter, actually fought Rocky Juarez in 92, 93 in the Silver Glove Nationals in Kansas City, Missouri. But always an athlete, man. Baseball, football, whatever it was. And I think like you just mentioned, you got that fighting spirit. And when the government, when you get a sentence, which I earned a prison sentence, but I don't think I earned a 40-year sentence. So, that made me want to fight, made me not want to ever give up. And I always felt like, you know what? No one's going to fight for my life like I'm going to fight for my life. So going into prison, I got right into the law work immediately in the county jail. And I'm reading stuff and I'm finding out stuff. And I'm like, hey, look, they made a mistake here. They made a mistake there. And that's just what had pushed me forward to keep fighting for my freedom. I used to tell people in prison, I'm going to do something every day to get out of here. I don't care if I'm doing a program. I don't care if I'm writing a senator. I don't care if I'm writing a congressman. I don't care if I'm writing an article for Prisoners Legal News, Criminals Legal News. And I'm sure, you've read many of the articles that I wrote that I would send to FAM and, they would publish some of them. But I always did something to try to get out of prison. And, I completed over 150 rehabilitative programs, got a college degree in prison. I mean, that was all part of, me getting out of prison, me doing something to get out. So,
I was going to say, you just covered a lot. And for those who don't know, what is the prison like? What does it look like in prison as far as programs, education? Because you made that sound fairly easy. Like, yeah, I got a college degree. I took some programs.
so here, I'll give you an example, not always easy. When they brought in that college program, right, they told me I'm not eligible because I had a 40-year sentence, so I couldn't go to college. So I
Mhm.
ended up doing a correspondence course and paid for my own college. As far as getting into programs, a lot of times, I was a firm believer that reentry started on the first day, right? And I'm sure you teach that. But, the Federal Bureau of Prisons was preventing that rehabilitation because it was almost impossible to get involved in programs. So I started going right to the warden. Hey, I need to get in this program. And one of the first programs that I got into was the warden was teaching a program. He was teaching a business class. The
What?
warden was actually teaching that class at Raybrook. So, once I got into that class, I mean, the warden kind of looked out for me, man, was pushing me into other programs, making sure I got into them. And I told him, I want to get out of prison someday. And I think I'm worthy of doing that. And I ended up writing a reentry program with Cedric Dean for Raybrook. And once we did that, I think, that kind of just allowed me to do a lot of things that I wanted to do as far as programming and stuff like that, but not
Wow.
always easy.
Listen, none of that was easy. Everything that you just said, and I know, you know, to look back on it, I don't think we give ourselves always enough credit because you made that sound very simple. But as you were explaining that, going to a warden, agreeing, first of all, to be in a warden's class, right? That's not always seen as a popular move. But what you're talking about is having the courage to be out there every day on the front lines talking about, listen, I'm going to do what I need to do to make sure that I make it out of here. And few people on the inside have the courage to do that. One, to believe in themselves, but then two, to actually do the work. And what you're saying is, doing sometimes what's not always popular, but when you're a person like yourself, I hope that people see the influence that that has, like you being willing to do that, to go in that class with that warden, I'm sure influenced other people to get on board as well.
Well, I spent a lot of my time in maximum security prisons, right? And eventually I would make it to that FCI. And once you made it to the FCI, and I was kind of the jailhouse lawyer, I was helping people get out of prison, I was winning cases. So, a lot of people did respect me. And like I mentioned, Cedric Dean was one of the other people that really, he gave me the roadmap. I mean, and people respected that cat. He had been in prison for 25 years. And, they seen us doing that stuff. We started teaching programs, facilitating alternative to violence project seminars. Dudes wanted to get out of jail. And I would tell them, look, you want my help? You want me to do your legal work? I would make them come to a GED class that I was teaching. It was a fast track GED class that I taught with Cedric Dean. So, that was kind of like an incentive. You want to get out of jail, man, you got to get your GED. You got to be in this class. So, not when you get to an FCI, Adam, this, that, things are a little bit, I mean, there's still some bad things going on there, but, people were starting to see that things were changing. And now people wanted to get involved. They wanted to, hey, oh, there is an incentive if I do the right thing. Maybe I can get out of jail. And eventually it would work out that way for a lot of folks.
Well, I would say it's largely like our cases are both very well known. And the work that we had to do on the inside, like very similar circumstance, right? Like what we had to compile to constitute extraordinary and compelling, which is what the U.S. Sentencing Commission is talking about, were a lot of things that those programs and opportunities aren't available in a lot of prisons. You're talking about Raybrook. I was at McKean. Both of us got very, very lucky in landing in those FCIs because, there's a lot of FCIs where there's nothing happening. And man, for those individuals, it's much more of an individual pursuit, right? Like the programs aren't in place and, people really got to go out and kind of blaze their own way. It sounds like you had Cedric Dean. I know I had people who paved the way for me, guy Kevin McTaggart. Kev, opened doors for me early on in Allenwood and did the same thing. When I got to McKean, he was there. I got off the bus, literally came out of R&D and he was like, hey man, I got you a cell right next to me. And it was on from there, having those established, someone with that level of respect from both, you know what I mean, our peers and from the administration, open doors. And I credit him with really showing me how to interact with administrators, because spending a decade in the pen, you know, I kept administration at arm's length. You know, like I didn't want to engage with them. So that was a challenge for me. It was interesting. I didn't know that there was a warden that you were able to connect with. And for people who don't know the system, especially the federal system, what they teach is don't ever get close to an inmate, because they will manipulate you. They will try and compromise you, like keep your distance. And it is all fear-based. It is all negative. That's the majority of the people running the system. So to have access to somebody like a warden, it's like a fiefdom, right? They run those prisons the way they want. And you had somebody on your team rooting for you that was in that position. That must have been really, really helpful.
I mean, it was. The warden was Warden Langford. He was big on rehabilitation. He was big on, I mean, I seen this cat get on his knees and helping a guy at a desk in the GED class. So he was big on that stuff. We had a reentry summit at the prison where people came from all over, you know, Oregon and California and Philadelphia. He put this big reentry summit on. I mean, the guy was really about, you know, trying to help people. So, you know, I appreciate that he did that. And, you know, you had talked about the guy that you had ran into. You know, I was with Cedric Dean and USP Lee, and he had asked me, this was probably in 2009. He's like, hey, man, I'm teaching these classes, man. Why don't you come to this class? I'm like, ah. He's, what are you doing? They changed the law and they bring back parole. You're going to go down there and tell them, hey, man, I've been carrying knives in prison. I've been, you know, selling drugs, doing this, doing that. And I said, man, I got 40 years, bro. You know, I mean, I'm trying to live my life here. I have to. And he's like, come to this Leaders Breed Leaders class. And the warden there actually made him teach the class to the prisoners and the staff. They had a prisoner teaching the classes to staff and prisoners. So I went to his class. Long story short, I ended up leaving that prison. And then a couple of years later, I'm on the bus going to Raybrook, and he gets on the bus. And I'm like, hey, what's up? And he's like, hey, man, you know, I want to see you do the right thing. You made it to an FCI. He said, when we get over here, I know the education supervisor. I get you a job in education. And that's when my life started to change. So my story, I didn't know your story as far as the dude helping you out. But it's crazy that I end up on a bus to Raybrook. You end up in McKean with the same dude that you were in the pen with that was trying to help you before. And that's where, you know, where my road, you know, it changed.
Wow, man. I got chills right now, because I'm always looking for those commonalities, because, you know, we had this conversation earlier about literally we are each one in a million. The odds of us being here right now are astronomical, because we slid out of a crack this wide. And I feel that. I mean, I know I carry a great weight of responsibility every single day, and I feel that weight for all those others who were left behind, because you were talking about, you know, you had a 40-year sentence. Like that, your release date was when?
2037, I think it was, 2038.
So you'd still have a couple more years to do, right?
And I went in at 24, was going to come home with good time at 60.
Oof. And that's, along with the sentences that we had, 924C sentences end up with like crazy, outrageous sentences, right? Hundreds of years. I had 213, 40. We know people have literally got hundreds of years. They're still sitting in there. Same situation.
Unfortunately, you know, there are a lot of guys. I mean, you left a guy behind at McKean.
Ian Owens.
Ian Owens. I mean, like his wife was like the voice of the 924C stacking. They got the Mercy Me, and this guy deserves, you know, honestly, you know, I've said it before, like he probably deserves to get out of prison more than I did, you know, and he's still sitting in prison. And I don't, you know, like just so people know, like I wrote the Conrado Cantu case as a jailhouse lawyer. That was the first compassionate release motion in the country to ever win. I wrote that from my prison cell after they had passed the First Step Act. I said, hey man, I think that I'm right. And he's like, let's try it. And he used to be the mayor down in Texas and the chief of police. And I got this guy, you know, and this is I changed my life. And this is a guy that I helped. And we put that together. And that was the first compassionate release motion to be granted. And he got out of prison. And of course, people like Sean Hopwood and, Judge Gleason, all these people have made this argument, 1,000 times better. But, people are getting out on that argument, thank God. People that deserve a second chance to reclaim their lives. People like yourself, people like me. Listen, I mean, they say that we're going to recidivate within 2 years? What's the numbers? And I've been out almost in June, it'll be 3 years. I got out, I got married, I have 2 little twin boys. I actually married my ex-wife, got remarried to her, and, living my best life. And at the same time, Adam, and I know you know this is, I have a paralegal and prison consultant firm, and I've gotten numerous people out of prison that deserve to get out, 924C stacking charges. Some people might not want to hear this, but, I've gotten some guys, from life sentences reduced to 30 that actually had, murders when they were 17, 18 years old. And you know what? It's always, I feel for the families and things like that of the victims, but I also believe that if you're rehabilitated, that tax dollars shouldn't be wasted on leaving you in prison. The punishment has been done. This guy's been in prison 25 years. It doesn't bring back the victim, or heal the family probably, but there are people that are in there for even violent crimes that deserve a second chance. They deserve a second look. So,
Well, I am quick to acknowledge that I am one of those people. I am a repeat violent offender. I had prior violence, robberies in my youth, did some time in the state, got out, and ended up doing the same thing again. I fell right back into the same circle, a lot of the same people, you know what I mean? So yeah. I have that experience, but I also, over the course of 20 plus years, became a totally different person. And I've watched so many others like Ian Owens, like Ricky Tyndall, and numerous others. I mean, that list is long of individuals who've totally changed their lives. Like, we matured in prison, right? Like, you grow up, and if I'm being honest about it, I know for me, like, prison for the first time gave me different responsibilities, right? Like, I had to adhere to a certain schedule. Not that I wanted to, I had to. And once I had that structure, man, I started to put the pieces together. And for the first time in my life, I finally came up with a plan and had a little bit different vision on okay, what do I want to do? For me, that's what it took. It took prison. I can't imagine how I get to where I am right now without it.
I mean, I think the same thing for me, but I think it probably took me about 7 or 8 years to really say, you know what, this hurts. I don't want to live like this. And I think that there's, it's different for all people. And I'm sure you've seen this. I think that there's a certain age. It might be 26 for you. It might be 30 for me. It might be 32 for the next guy. But something clicks, and you do start to mature. You do start to appreciate, I guess, what the framers found so important: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You start to say, you know what, that stuff matters to me. I do want to be free. I don't want to be a criminal. Every day I wake up 5 a.m. and I got these 2 little 15-month-old twin boys, and I'm like, I love these guys. I don't never want to go back to prison. They need me. They're my priority. But sometimes I think it does take prison. I needed prison, because had I got back out, I would have probably, been doing the same thing. And who knows what would have happened, where I would have been at. Might not have been here. But it did take some time to learn to appreciate your freedom. And like we said, there's so many guys like Ian Owens. I'm working on a case now, Laval Farmer, another guy that, he got a life plus 75 years, stacked 924Cs. Mm-hmm. He was 19 years old. He's been in prison 25 years. He's probably completed, in all honesty, more programs than any other prisoner I have ever seen. Will he get a chance? I think it always, I think it comes down to the judge. And I think Sean Hopwood mentioned this. Sometimes you can end up, with a judge that no matter what you've done in prison, you're not getting a second chance. And, I seen him, he testified to that probably about a year ago. I seen him on an interview. Sean Hopwood, your lawyer, your good friend.
Well, listen, I mean, he's got a point there. It's all relative. My issue with the majority of people in positions of authority within our criminal justice system have no good reference point, right? Like, they've never spent a single night in jail. I promise you, if that was part of the onboard training for whatever government job you had within the criminal justice system, you just had to spend a night a night in one of those holding cells, say in a county jail, you would view time very, very differently, right? You'd have a whole different perspective one night.
Let me say this, right? I live in Rochester, New York, and every time I drive past that county jail, I get that same feeling. Even you just talked about, there's a feeling that I get of loneliness and depression, and it's like I can envision it, like being in that holding cell with 30 other people in a cell that's really designed for probably 15. The dirt, the urine all over the place. I mean, bologna sitting on the ground and balled up bread sandwiches, and you're just like, and I see that, man. I envision that. And sometimes, when you think about that stuff, it bothers me still. I still have that, you know what I mean? It takes you back there for a minute or two.
I do. Believe me, I get it. I go into the county jail every Monday morning, freely of my own volition, right? I work with, we have a reentry unit over there that I helped set up. Right now, there's about between 40 and 50 women in there. Most times, they're all varying stages towards their release, right? And my goal is to go in there and not only share my story, but to give them some actionable items, some things that they can be working on during that time where, they have to collect their thoughts and to really focus on, man, what they want to do differently when they walk out the door. And I often reiterate, like, I wish somebody would have done that for me. There was no one who did that for me all throughout my youth when I was in and out. They taught me all the wrong things. I was programmed with, all the bad chips. And it wasn't until I met that guy, Kevin McTaggart, in the pen. And, he opened the door and gave me an option to do something different. And, I'd like to think that showing people that there's a different way, early on, at least gives them the option, man, like to see what we've been able to achieve, lets people know that, man, you do have options. Because I know for me, when I started seeing the success, like my attorney, Sean Hopwood, guy was in the prison, law library, found a passion for the law, gets out, goes to law school, becomes an attorney, and then gets recruited by Georgetown Law, one of the top law schools in the world, like frequent guest of the White House. I'm sitting in prison watching this going, man, anything is possible. You can't tell me that there is something that I cannot do on the outside because I see this guy. And I've got a list of other people that I've seen do amazing things. So the world needs to hear more of the success stories. Unfortunately, the media often portrays all of the negative, and it only takes one Willie Horton, right, to scare all the politicians away and convince them not to rule on certain things. So with this compassionate release, what they've effectively done is open the door to basically others like us that had these crazy sentences are now, those judges are at least going to have the opportunity. They can't say, well, I am bound, my hands are tied, I have no discretion here. They've opened that door wide enough.
Yeah, and just to kind of go back to what you were talking about, as far as, wishing that you had someone that could open up, your mind and let you know that this is what it is, right? And I had told guys when I was leaving, I said, look, I'm gonna be the voice of the voiceless. And I got out here and I put the paralegal and prison consultant firm together to help dudes, but also I make a living doing it. And then I put that YouTube channel together, Blood on the Razor Wire. And that is, unfortunately, people want to hear the bad. And sometimes you got to give them the bad in order to give them the message. And that's what I do on my YouTube channel. The mission is to save kids from life imprisonment and premature death in the streets. That was the original mission, but you'd be shocked to know how many dudes email me that say, hey man, I just got out of the feds, or I've been home, man, 12, 13 months. And you know what? Your show is the reason why I put my work boots on instead of my Timbs and going out there on the corner and putting a gun in my waist and, bagging up some dope. Like your show keeps me focused. It makes me not, ever forget where I was at. And, I think a lot of them guys and women get that same feeling. I said about that county jail, and sometimes you need that. Sometimes you need that slap, that wake up call, so, and then as far as the compassionate release goes, this is the deal. the Sentencing Commission has now given the authority to federal judges to be judges again. A lot of people don't realize that federal judges weren't really able to judge. They said, hey, look, there's the guideline, these are the points, and I have to give you, 480 months because that's your mandatory minimum. But now federal judges can take a second look, which it's needed. They can take a second look and say, you know what? I think Adam Clausen changed his life and I'm going to give him a shot. And look what happened. Your judge gave you a shot. And I mean, you're out here, you're doing big things. I've seen you're meeting with the BOP director. You're testifying in front of the Sentencing Commission. So that's important. My judge, I'm going to be straight up, Adam. My judge wrote me a letter. He wrote me a letter, saying, hey, look, you're doing the right thing. And then a couple months ago, he says, I want to meet with you and your wife and your kids. My judge is Judge Larimer out of the Western District of New York, Republican appointee. And I went to his chambers and I met with my judge. And he said, look, man, I went out on a limb for you. You're out here. You seem like you're doing the right thing. And I want you to continue to do that. This wasn't an easy decision for me to make. But I made it and you're doing great. And I'm proud of you. Just keep doing the right thing. And you know what? That meant a lot to me, man. I respect that man more than anyone, any adult male that I've ever respected in my life. I respect him. And I knew that, he had to sentence me. I was a bad dude at one time. I deserved to go to prison. I didn't deserve 40 years, but I definitely deserved to go to prison. And I also believe that I deserved a second chance. And he gave me that opportunity. But there's a lot more Adam Clausens and a lot more Chad Markses sitting in federal prison that deserve a second chance. Ian Owens at the top of the list.
Absolutely. And I want to point out back to your judge, Larimer, sitting in prison, watching cases come through, reading these opinions of judges, you can kind of see where they land, right? Judge Gleason, like holding on to hope for all those years. I'm like, man, this is the guy, because he wrote the blueprint in the Holloway case that, for those of us that had these crazy sentences, we're like, oh my God, somebody with some sense sees that, these sentences are crazy. And then when he left, goes into private practice, becomes an advocate. It's like, man, finally someone from that side has come over basically to our side to be an advocate. And I want to point out for those judges, for your judge, Larimer, obviously for Gleason, he gave up his job to do this. For my judge, Gerald Pappert, the courage that it takes to rule on a case like ours, to grant us compassionate release. Because, okay, ideally, federal judges are a lifetime appointment, right? And we say it's done that way to shield them from any outside influence so they can rule the way that they want to rule. That's not the reality. Judges have aspirations as well. And if they want to move up, they need what's called a blue slip. Blue slip is the political part where they have to get that from their state representatives in order to move up to the next level, to be an appellate court judge. There is politics there. And I promise you that every time they make a decision, whether they acknowledge it or not, in the back of their mind, they're like, man, if I give this guy a shot and he goes out and does something, like that's going to affect me. Like I might be stuck in this position. I may never go any further. That's a reality.
And it is a reality. And you spoke about Judge Gleason, so I want to kind of give people an idea who he is. He is the guy that prosecuted John Gotti. He was assistant U.S. attorney under Giuliani, and he prosecuted him. He then became a federal judge for 23 years, stepped off the bench, and decided to help people. And actually, he was my lawyer. I had filed some stuff pro se. I had wrote Harlan Protas. For those that don't know who he is, he was Holloway's lawyer. The Holloway doctrine, which you were just talking about. And Judge Gleason ended up reducing this guy's sentence. But first he had asked the U.S. attorney to do that, Loretta Lynch, who would later on become the attorney general for Obama. And they were bucking. They were like, no, we're not going to do this. And he kind of said, well, I might have to, take a look at some of this post-conviction stuff that he filed, this 60B. And then they decided, you know what, we think he does deserve a second chance, Judge. And we're going to agree to vacate one of these 924C sentences, and you can resentence him. And eventually Gleason does that. And, he commends the U.S. Attorney's Office for doing the right thing, but they didn't want to do the right thing at first, right? And they did it because I think there was some pressure. But I'm glad that they did it because it did open the door. People started saying, "Oh, wow." And then all the stuff that they were submitting to the Sentencing Commission
Hold up.
while we were in
What year was that?
the Holloway case.
Yep.
2000, let me think.
It's early.
13? 13, right after Lafler versus Cooper, Missouri versus Fry, 2013,
I
2014.
thought it was even earlier than that. Just
I'm going to say 13 or 14.
okay, just to put it in perspective, like we're talking about, this is a legal battle that has gone on for decades. Like the results that we're seeing now is decades long. Like when we came in, I know 2000, when I walked in the door, first of all, nobody was talking about criminal justice reform. Certainly nobody was going to reduce a sentence, right? It was all about being tough on crime. And when my appeal became final in 2005, that was it. There was no chance of parole. There was no hope for relief. We had to either get Congress to change the law or get a president to sign a commutation reducing the sentence. And at that time, like that was the furthest thing. That wasn't even realistic, right? So again, you were in that same position. I've talked about this before. Having that belief and holding on to that hope when really there was very, very little reason to hold on to hope at that time. This was a decades-long battle.
Like you said, I mean, there was little hope, but excuse me. One of the first things, like I had always thought, well, maybe I used to say this, because I was reading the law, and I said, maybe in 20 years someone will give me clemency. That was my hope at one point in time, Adam. It was something that I had held on to, and then things did start to change. They changed, the crack law. That changed a little bit. Then they changed it again, and I'm like, okay. Then Obama started talking about the Clemency Project. I'm like, okay. And I did a couple dudes clemencies while I was in prison. And one of them was a dude that was involved in he got clemency. He was involved in a bunch of stuff in prison. He was a blood gang member, assault on staff, and Obama granted his clemency. And on the same day that they granted his clemency, he's like, "Yo, bro, they just granted my stuff." I was in education with him. And then my unit team had called me up there and they said, "Hey, man, they denied you today." And my unit team like really kind of cared about me. Like the lady felt bad. They felt bad for me. And I was like, wow, this dude got it. And I didn't, and I'm the dude that wrote his stuff. So he ended up getting clemency. And then I was like, wow, man, all hope's gone. And I wrote an article, and I think it was in the Criminal Legal News or the Prisoners Legal News. And FAM might have published it. I talked about, standing at the window that night when Trump was elected. And I started to cry, but not just for me, but for everybody else, because I thought it was over with, another 4 years, maybe 8 years, tough stance on, criminals and crime. And then eventually under that administration, and a lot of it had to do with Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. And they were burning the midnight oil, and Trump contacts McConnell and says, "Look, I want this to happen." And, that's because Jared and Ivanka were probably really pushing him. Mm-hmm. And they end up pushing it through. And Sean Hopwood, your lawyer, was another, major contributor. I know that he doesn't like to admit to that, but he was the voice for the voiceless. Mm-hmm. And eventually they did it, and they did something that I never thought would ever happen. And when they passed that First Step Act, I was reading that thing like looking for something. Something's going to save me. Look, they changed the 924C, but they didn't make it retroactive. And I'm in the law library with Chris Hunter, and Chris had 35 years and just got out on the CARES Act, thank God. And I'm thinking, man, this is it, bro. I didn't know everything, but I see it. And I'm like, this is it. I think that we can get out this way. And I had wrote Brandon Sample, another former federal prisoner that's now a lawyer. Mm-hmm. And he says, look, man, 1B1.13 is going to be the hurdle. And I saved those emails. I kept them. And I said, no, man, I think you're wrong. And we did that Conrado Cantu case, and we sent that in. And, he granted it. And it was not a really great piece of work, but it was just like, this is what I think. And his judge granted it in Texas. And after that, I mean, it just took off after that. Then Erkovich with the 924Cs, eventually me, then eventually you. And, like you said earlier, so people can get a perspective. My judge granted my motion. The day that it was granted, they started telling me to pack my stuff. I was leaving in the morning.
Yep.
Then they said, oh, hold on, we made a mistake. We miscalculated your good time. So they went back and they said, okay, you're getting out in, 2 months or whatever. So on that day when I'm getting out, my family comes to the prison to pick me up. They're walking me out. He says, "You got clothes?" I've been around a long time. He's like, "If you got clothes, I'll do you first." I said, "No, I don't have no clothes. My family's just, they're coming to get me, and they got clothes in the vehicle, and I'm going to go to a hotel." And he's like, "All right, I'm going to do these guys that got clothes, and then I'll get you." So I'm like the fourth or fifth dude, and they're walking me out, and they call on the walkie-talkie. And I knew it, bro. I knew it. I just had that. You ever have a feeling and you're right? And they said, "Stop him.
Mhm.
There's an appeal. Stop him. Do not open that gate." I was literally maybe 10, 12 feet away from the gate. I had already walked through one of the gates, and they stopped me, man. And they put in an appeal. And then I talked to Gleason and Marissa Taney, who's she was over there at the office with him. Another phenomenal attorney, Elizabeth Costello, big props to her. Another phenomenal attorney over there with Gleason. And they're like, "Look, you're going to be stuck in here. You're not going to get out. You're going to be here until the duration of the appeal. And, this is probably going to go to the Supreme Court too. So, I'm sorry, but you're probably going to be there for another year or two. And, it might not work out if it goes to the Supreme Court." And we had these conversations. So they ended up filing an immediate appeal, and my judge said, on the eve of his release, the government appeals when you had all these months to do it before he got out. And he kind of bashed the government. And then 2 weeks later, I ended up winning that appeal, and I was released. And eventually they ended up dropping their appeal altogether. And thank God they dropped the appeal. That was right around the time when Booker came out. Jeremy Zulo, very good friend of mine who I also helped out. And, that came down out of the Second Circuit, and they dropped the appeal. And thank God I got a second chance at life. And the scary part is this, Adam, like I said, I remarried my ex-wife, right? It was almost as if I couldn't have a life. I could not have a life at the time because I didn't know if I was going back to jail.
Oh,
I didn't want to mess her life up. And I'm thinking, wow, I can't get a vehicle because I can't have a car payment, because if I ever went to jail, all this stuff would be blown. I can't get a house and get a mortgage. But, like I said, eventually things would work out, man. And these are, this is my motivation, Adam. These are my two little boys when they were just about
yes.
months old. But
Beautiful
that's just
boys.
the best dad ever. And that's what I aspire to be, man. The best dad ever, bro. Me and you will both be in first place because I know you got a little boy too.
That's what it's all about, man. I'm telling you, I was explaining to somebody yesterday, when you've been through what we've been through, we live with a different sense of appreciation that others will just probably never know. And those two boys right there, talk about motivation. Man, I want to back up for 1 second because, in the beginning, I kind of teased that story. I didn't want to talk about it. I wanted to hear it from you, getting all the way to the door. Your family's out there. Listen, I heard about that, and it hurt my heart. And I was like, oh my God, how do they do that to somebody? And then when I got immediate release, when I tell you I had envisioned what this was going to be like, you dream about this. Because I believed it was going to happen. Like, I'm getting out of here one day. This is what it's going to be like when I walk out the door. And all of a sudden, they came and they got me. And I remember watching the case manager come with the guy from R&D. And I see him walking. They got to get through the door, and they're looking at me, but they're like expressionless. And I'm like, is this it? Is this it? Because I'm waiting on the results from the court. And they come to me. They're like, "So, you ready to go?" I'm like, What are you talking about? They're like, "You want to go?" I'm like, "Don't play with me." They're like, "You got immediate release." And I'm like, seriously? I was like, oh my, and I'm like stuck. And everything in me wanted to jump and be excited. But you had just gotten stopped on the way out the door. So I couldn't get that excitement up. Everything that had been in my mind was on pause. And I'm like, until I walk out the door, until I get in that car with my wife, I'm not going to believe that this is actually going to happen. I couldn't. And ultimately, that immediate release was an immediate release. The BOP played around for 3 days, tried to get me to sign because they didn't do their job. And, as a guy with a life sentence, they weren't doing progress reports. They didn't change my release address. They had my arrest address. Listen, I don't know who lives there over in Jersey, but it wasn't me, and I sure as hell wasn't going to sign that paper after fighting for 20 years to get that release, I wasn't going to sign off to something that I knew wasn't true. And that's what they wanted me to do. So we fought for 3 days. And here's where I don't think I've ever told you this. Finally, we get there and Sean, my attorney's on the phone. He winds up getting the judge involved. So now everybody's pissed off. They won't even talk to me as I'm leaving, but they get me to R&D and I'm like, you know what, whatever. They've called my wife. I'm down there with my cart, all my books you see behind me and many, many more, my notebooks, everything. And I'm out there, I'm waiting. I see her coming. I'm like, oh my God, it's real. It's real. I was like, okay. She gets all the way there, gets out of the car, comes around, and I'm just like, oh my God. I come around and I hug her and I'm holding on to her and I don't want to let go. And this cop's walking out because it's shift change. He goes, hey, Clausen, they want you back inside. The death grip that Roe put on me, like, he was joking and he didn't know anything about your situation or what's in my mind, in our mind. But my God, both of our hearts dropped in that moment. I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me, man. There's no way. I'm like, do we just get in the car and go, man? I was like, no, you can't take this. And I turn and I look and he's laughing. And I'm like, man, that wasn't funny. That was the only guy who talked to me that day on the way out. And it was to make a joke. So we got in the car and got out of there. And like, it's still, that whole day didn't feel real because I kept thinking that they were coming to bring me back in.
Well, I'm glad that you're free, man, and I know you're doing big things and you're helping a lot of people, and the reentry thing's phenomenal. You're honestly, people that don't know you, I can attest that, man, you're a really good dude. We actually had some disagreements over emails through someone else. I don't know if you remember that, through me, where you're like, yo, you're trying to push this, and this doesn't help guys that are second time offenders, and I was like, I'm sorry, buddy, but I'm a first time 924 offender. I'm trying to get out of here, so I need this bill to pass.
Yeah,
and we
man.
went back and forth, and I remember those arguments through the computer, and then eventually we would talk, and you came on my podcast, on my YouTube channel for an interview, and I really appreciate you, and I appreciate the work that you're doing, and for you to be able to go in front of the Sentencing Commission and talk and testify, and for you to talk to the new BOP director. You need people in there to do that have intelligence. They won't ever invite me because I'm a little bit I don't know, rough around the edges. I'm gonna speak my mind, and I'm a little bit boisterous, and people that they know that,
And we need that. We need that voice. We need that voice as well.
I'm a very respectful dude, and they should bring me once in a while. Because
I'll tell you this. I'll give you my word that whatever I can do to get you involved in those conversations, I will, without a doubt. Because I see everything that you're doing as well. And I know your motivation. I know those two little boys. And man, listen, we need many, many more individuals like us to step up, to be those examples, to inspire the courage that's needed for these judges to keep making these decisions, because now they can do it, right?
Yes, and you know what? I don't think they have to wait till November. I think the Sentencing Commission's appointed by Congress. I think that they have effectively said, look, that ruling in McCall in the Sixth Circuit. No, I mean that's overruled now. The Bryant case down there in the 11th Circuit that Sean Hopwood argued and worked extremely hard on. I think that overturns that. I think people should know that. I think that not on no Republican hating stuff or Democrats or anything, but obviously you could see from the Sentencing Commission votes that they're going to be pushing against that becoming law in November. I think that's coming, and how is it going to pan out? And they should think about this. And I'm just going to give it to you real, and it's wrote in that Holloway case. African Americans are disproportionately destroyed based on 924C stacking. You can't possibly say that this law is wrong. It's wrong, but we're not going to make it retroactive. It's only going to affect the guys that get arrested now. It's not going to affect the guys, the fathers and the mothers that are sitting in prison, the Ian Owens guys, the people like Laval Farmer. It doesn't affect them. How does it not? If the law is wrong, then the law is wrong. That's it. Plain and simple. It should affect everybody. Same thing with the 851 enhancements. They said it was wrong in the First Step Act, but it doesn't apply to the people already in prison. It only applies to the new guys. If it's wrong, it's wrong. So, I think judges should really look at that stuff and say, you know what? I'm going to do the right thing here. I'm going to give this guy a shot. I'm going to give him a chance, especially if they show, hey, look, I am rehabilitated. I have changed my life. And taxpayers should appreciate that, because you shouldn't be wasting taxpayer dollars on over incarcerating people that are rehabilitated, where the punishment has been done and there's nothing left but suffering. And I wrote that to my judge, man. I used to write my judge letters and tell him the punishment's over. The rehabilitation's been done. There's nothing left but suffering. I'm suffering. And I think it rang to his ears. And eventually, he would give me a second chance, and I'm doing everything I can with it.
Well, thankfully, we both got these second chances. And man, it's been a privilege to spend this time with you. I'm so grateful that we were able to get you on here on Gritability today. Is there anything that you want to promote on the way out the door? Any other pages? Tell us about your social media.
Well, I got my book kind of halfway in that background, but people can check out this book. It's called Blood on the Razor Wire. The first 3 chapters are free on Amazon. Go check it out. I promise you won't be disappointed. It actually sold out the first day, and people say they can read it in a day and a half. They can't put it down. Also, I have a YouTube channel, Blood on the Razor Wire. I've interviewed former federal judges on there, former gang members, current gang members, people in prison. Actually interviewed a DEA agent, an active DEA agent, former FBI agent. We do a lot of things over there. I interviewed you. I interviewed the judge that went to the White House to visit with Trump with Kim Kardashian. But the mission is to save kids from life imprisonment and premature death in the streets. And also now to give dudes a reminder, and women, men and women, a reminder that this is what it's like in there. Don't ever forget it. Keep doing the right thing. If all you're doing is going to work and able to pay your bills and order a pizza, you know what? It's better than being in prison and working in the chow hall for 8 cents an hour. So check us out, Blood on the Razor Wire TV on YouTube, Freedom Fighters Paralegal and Prison Consultant Firm, and the Blood on the Razor Wire, book on Amazon.
All
Definitely
right.
appreciate it.
Chad, we appreciate having you here, man. It's been another incredible episode of Gritability, Power of Perseverance, Overcoming Seemingly Insurmountable Odds to Attain the Life of Your Dreams. I'm your podcast host, Adam Clausen, and we will see you back here on the next episode.